Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel that breaks down power, propaganda, and politics from every corner of the globe. If you're into geopolitical unraveling and global trend lines, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell notification button. Because today, we're diving into how Nicaragua became a modern family dictatorship and why it could be the beginning of a dangerous global trend. It was a Tuesday, January 30th, 2025. The world's attention was scattered. Israel and Iran were nearing a dangerous escalation. The US was in the middle of a contentious election cycle, and in Europe, protests were flaring over energy prices amid the noise. Nicaragua's National Assembly quietly passed a constitutional reform bill that at first glance seemed unremarkable. But buried in the legislation, wrapped in bureaucratic language, was something that would send shockwaves through Latin America's already fragile democratic spine. Article 4B, the legal creation of a dual executive office. The law, as Al Jazeera would later report, granted Rosario Murillo equal governing power with her husband, President Daniel Ortega. The amendment formalized their role of co-presidency, giving both leaders full authority over legislative vetoes, judiciary appointments, and perhaps the most significant factor, the armed forces. There was no political debate, no referendum, and no opposition. Ortega's party, the FSLN, controls 90 out of 92 seats in Nicaragua's National Assembly. The law passed unanimously. And just like that, a 21st century monarchy was born. International media outlets scrambled to interpret the implications. Reuters described it as a consolidation of dynastic power. The Guardian called it a symbolic death of checks and balances. And AP News went further, stating that Nicaragua had effectively become a family-run government with constitutional teeth. To understand the gravity of this move, we must examine not just the power granted, but the psychology behind it. Because this wasn't merely about governance, this was about identity. And for the Ortega-Murillo duo, that identity is inseparable from the idea of eternal rule. The story of Nicaragua's new diarchy can't be told without understanding the personal journey of its architects. Daniel Ortega's political resume is unlike any in the region. A revolutionary in the 1970s, he rose to prominence as a member of the Sandinista National Liberation Front, or FSLN, an armed socialist movement that ousted the US-backed Somoza dictatorship in 1979. Ortega became president in 1985, then lost the re-election in 1990. For a while, it looked like his chapter in Nicaragua's political story had closed. But he never truly left the stage. He returned to power in 2007 and since then has won every election, each more questionable than the last. Over time, his rhetoric changed, from socialist revolutionary to conservative strongman, from populist to autocrat, and quietly by his side always stood Rosario Murillo. Murillo is more than a political partner. She's a poet, a mystic, a master of image. Her background in literature and Catholicism blends with her iron-fisted managerial style to create a persona that is equal parts spiritual mother and enforcer. As the Tico Times noted, Murillo has long served as the regime's propaganda architect. She controls state television, she drafts the daily talking points, she writes poetic speeches that praise peace and harmony, while ordering the arrest of dissenters. Her voice is omnipresent. Literally every day, Murillo gives a midday address on national radio. During these broadcasts, she often references biblical passages, planetary alignments, and ancestral spirits, all while declaring enemies of the state as sons of darkness. But behind the metaphor is meticulous control. DW reports that Murillo manages nearly all government communications. Ministers must clear messaging through her office, presidential photographers receive personal editing instructions, even in public park decor, color schemes, slogans, statues are subject to her approval. Murillo isn't just co-president, she is the voice, face, and filter of the regime. The dynamic was, for years, informal, but with the passage of the co-presidency law in 2025, it became the law of the new land. Together, they are Nicaragua's mother and father, not metaphorically, but legally. The legal shift didn't happen in a vacuum. This was the culmination of nearly 2 decades of systemic power consolidation. According to the Journal of Democracy, Ortega and Murillo began dismantling democratic institutions as early as 2008. First, they stacked the Supreme Court with loyalists. Then they eliminated term limits. Next came the Electoral Commission, reorganized under executive control. By 2016, when Murillo became vice president, the path to a co-presidency was already paved. But that still wasn't enough. What followed was a slow-motion coup of every autonomous body in Nicaragua. Media outlets critical of the regime were shut down or bought out. According to Democracy Now!, over 30 independent radio stations were closed in 2019 alone. Universities faced budget cuts if they refused to endorse Sandinista history. Professors were fired for ideological inconsistencies. And perhaps most critically, military and police forces were brought directly under the influence of the First Family. As El País reported in March 2025, Murillo was formally named Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. Think about that. The Vice President of a country already acting as co-president is now in command of the military, a role usually held solely by the head of state. But in Nicaragua, there is no longer one head of state, there are two, and they are married. The global response to the January 2025 constitutional reforms was swift and fierce. Within 48 hours of the law passing, the United Nations Human Rights Council issued a formal statement condemning the move. Their assessment, according to Reuters, accused Nicaragua of institutionalizing authoritarianism under a dynastic model that violated the Inter-American Democratic Charter. UN special rapporteurs were even more blunt. One report described the reforms as a parliamentary auto-coup, a manipulation of legal tools to extinguish democracy without a single shot being fired. The Organization of American States, or OAS, despite its increasingly limited influence over Nicaragua since Ortega withdrew in 2021, called for emergency consultations and sanctions, but the measures were largely symbolic. The European Union took a stronger line, as El País reported. The EU renewed its sanctions package against Nicaragua for another year, freezing assets and banning travel for top officials, including Murillo and Ortega's children, many of whom occupy senior government roles or lead lucrative state-affiliate businesses. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department announced expanded visa bans. Over 250 individuals linked to the regime were targeted under the Global Magnitsky Act. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken stated publicly, "Nicaragua is no longer a flawed democracy, it is a personalized tyranny disguised in legalism." But perhaps the most telling reaction came not from politicians, but from corporations. According to regional analysts cited in Geopolitics Unplugged, several multinational investors, including Canadian mining firms and Spanish telecoms, quietly began pulling out of Nicaragua. The reason? Risk models could no longer quantify the political volatility. Contracts were now subject to the whims of two people, whose domestic power was unchecked and whose foreign policy leaned increasingly towards alliances with authoritarian regimes like Venezuela, Russia, and Iran. Despite international condemnation, Ortega and Murillo doubled down. In official press releases, they framed the backlash as a colonialist smear campaign. Murillo, in a February 2025 address, declared that foreign powers cannot dictate the sacred right of Nicaraguans to choose their leaders, even if those leaders are chosen from the same family. Power consolidation doesn't just happen in laws and headlines. It happens in whispers, in cameras, in every keystroke typed in fear. Nicaragua's surveillance apparatus has evolved into one of the most intrusive in the Western Hemisphere. According to a legal analysis from the University of Cincinnati Law Blog, Murillo's Ministry of the Interior has launched over 17 nationwide programs under the pretense of harmonious security. These include neighborhood informant networks, mandatory biometric databases for social services, and AI-enhanced facial recognition cameras installed in all major cities. This network is reinforced by so-called peace and harmony brigades, civilian patrols funded by the state to monitor communities for signs of dissent. As Civicus Monitor explains, these groups operate with impunity, often reporting individuals for minor infractions like skipping pro-government rallies or criticizing officials on WhatsApp. The consequences are real. A leaked document published by independent Nicaraguan journalists, now in exile, reveals over 5,000 citizens have been interrogated since 2022 under suspicion of digital sedition. Online forums have gone dark. VPN usage has spiked, and encrypted messaging apps have become a lifeline for political dissidents. But even these tools aren't safe. In January 2025, a whistleblower at the National Telecom revealed that all internet service providers are legally obligated to hand over metadata, including message timestamps, IP addresses, and location pings, to the Ministry of Strategic Communication, a department chaired by Murillo herself. In Nicaragua, silence isn't just survival, it's the default state of being. Still, despite the omnipresent fear, resistance endures. Not in grand marches or dramatic confrontations, but in smaller, quieter forms. In early 2025, a new wave of Nicaraguan exiles began arriving in Costa Rica, Spain, and the US, bringing with them encrypted USBs filled with photos, testimonies, and confidential reports detailing human rights abuses. Many of these individuals were journalists, former civil servants, or university students, once loyal to the Sandinista cause. According to Dialogue Americas, nearly 250,000 Nicaraguans have fled the country since 2018, but the pace has accelerated dramatically since the co-presidency law. One student interviewed anonymously by Democracy Now! Described how her entire thesis committee was disbanded because she refused to title her project in honor of Los Comandantes. Another, a former municipal clerk in Matagalpa, explained how government employees were forced to post weekly social media tributes to Ortega and Murillo, or risk termination. Within Nicaragua, the Catholic Church, once a bastion of civil resistance, has been largely silenced. Several bishops were expelled, others placed under house arrest. As AP News reported, the Vatican issued a rare rebuke, describing the Ortega regime's treatment of the clergy as ideological persecution. Yet, voices remain. In exile, digital radio stations have sprung up. Diaspora-led NGOs gather testimony, publish translated articles, and push for UN action. And though anonymous, Telegram channel activists inside the country coordinate symbolic acts. Flashes of candlelight during blackouts, silent sit-ins at schools, or art pieces that subtly subvert government propaganda. The resistance isn't gone, it's just underground. Nicaragua's descent into legalized dynastic rule isn't just a national crisis, it's a regional blueprint. Across Latin America, fragile democracies have watched the Ortega-Murillo playbook with equal parts fear and fascination. And for certain regimes, it's an inspiration. In El Salvador, President Nayib Bukele, though popularly elected, has increasingly centralized power, weakened judicial oversight, and deployed military theatrics to pressure legislative bodies. While not yet a diarchy, Bukele has already hinted at dynastic succession by elevating close family members into high political posts. In Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro himself, the heir to Hugo Chavez, has congratulated Ortega and Murillo on their sovereign courage. As Al Jazeera reports, Venezuela and Nicaragua have deepened economic and intelligence cooperation in 2025, including shared surveillance tools and police training exercises. And in Honduras, political analysts have noted that certain parties are now exploring constitutional tweaks that would allow for vice presidents to assume expanded co-governing roles. It's a regional feedback loop. Authoritarian ideas, when dressed in legal formalities, spread faster than fire in a dry forest. As Geopolitics Unplugged argues, we may be witnessing the rise of a new model, not military juntas, not one-man dictatorships, but family-governed legal states. Institutions remain on paper, elections occur on schedule, and laws are passed, but all serve the interest of a central clan. This makes opposition more difficult. It's no longer enough to target a single strongman. The regime is woven into bloodlines, bureaucracies, and belief systems. Nicaragua isn't the first nation to fall under dynastic rule, but it may be the most flagrant in recent memory to do so through constitutional procedure. To understand the implications, we must place Ortega and Murillo within a broader trend: the global rise of family authoritarianism. Consider the Rajapaksa family in Sri Lanka. Over the past 2 decades, members of the same family held the presidency, prime ministership, and key ministerial roles. Their reign ended in massive economic collapse and civil unrest. In Azerbaijan, the Aliyev family has held power since 1993. Ilham Aliyev succeeded his father and appointed his wife as vice president. The parallels are clear. Russia's Putin-Medvedev swap remains one of the most studied cases of personalized power, cloaked in constitutional legality. Though not blood-related, it showcased how political continuity can be staged to comply with legal optics. What makes Nicaragua unique is the elevation of a spouse to full co-presidential status, codified without even pretending to alternate power. As the Journal of Democracy writes, it marks a next-level evolution of the hybrid regime, where legality becomes the instrument, not the barrier to permanent rule. This sets a dangerous precedent, not only for Latin America, but for every semi-democratic state, balancing between populism, strongman rule, and constitutional collapse. So why does this strategy work? Why do regimes like Ortega's lean so heavily into legal frameworks to justify undemocratic power grabs? It's simple legitimacy. Unlike coups, legal authoritarianism avoids international isolation by maintaining a thin veil of institutionalism. Laws are passed, judges are appointed, parliaments meet. But behind that stagecraft is a deeper psychology. Authoritarian legalism thrives on ambiguity. It forces citizen courts and foreign observers to argue over definitions, while the regime simply accumulates power. Ortega and Murillo understood this well. They didn't suspend the constitution, they rewrote it. They didn't disband the judiciary, they repopulated it. They didn't ban opposition, they criminalized their funding, their platforms, their associations. And in doing so, they created a reality where repression isn't imposed, it's enacted by law. As the University of Cincinnati law blog observed, this has chilling implications. Dissent becomes not just dangerous, but illegal by default. This strategy is especially effective in post-revolutionary societies like Nicaragua, where the line between patriotism and political loyalty is already blurred. By tying the regime to national identity, opposition is reframed as betrayal, not just of government, but of country, family, and faith. Guys, it's not just authoritarianism, it's ideological entrapment. If legalism is the body of the regime, propaganda is its soul. Murillo, often referred to as Nicaragua's high priestess of power, has transformed state messaging into a near-religious experience. But this isn't propaganda as we traditionally know it. It's spiritual, symbolic, and deeply emotional. Every government broadcast is laced with the language of divine fate. Ortega is not merely president, he's framed as the protector of Christian values, the defender of national peace, and the voice of ancestral wisdom. Murillo, for her part, blends Catholic imagery with indigenous mysticism, often referring to the nation as a body of energy and harmony, disrupted only by foreign devils and traitors. According to Democracy Now! And Civicus Monitor, this fusion of the state and soul has real psychological impact. For many rural citizens, especially older generations raised under Sandinista revolutionaries, resistance now feels like sacrilege. Government billboards show the couple side by side, often haloed in sunbursts. State TV plays looped music videos featuring young children reciting oaths to Los Comandantes. And every night, the national anthem is followed by a second hymn. Not to the country, but to the presidential family. This isn't just propaganda, it's mass conditioning. As NOR's public opinion survey from early 2025 revealed, a significant portion of Nicaraguans now associate political stability with Murillo's continued leadership, even if they privately express mistrust towards the regime's actions. The regime has successfully collapsed the categories of state, family, religion, and identity. And in doing so, it's made rebellion not just a crime, but a psychological fracture. So what's next for Nicaragua? The answer depends on where you look. Inside the country, fear reigns. Surveillance has silenced public protest. The church has been co-opted or crushed. Education has been rewritten. But outside Nicaragua, especially among the diaspora, a new generation is rising. Exiled journalists are rebuilding media. From Costa Rica, NGOs in Miami and Madrid are training young Nicaraguans in digital security, political theory, and international law. Former military officers who once served the regime have begun releasing testimony on war crimes and internal corruption. Reuters recently highlighted a growing network of legal advocates preparing to submit new cases to the International Criminal Court under universal jurisdiction statutes. These are not quick fixes, but they are long-term weapons. Meanwhile, Gen Z Nicaraguans, those who never saw the original revolution, are building an identity rooted in resistance, creativity, and transnational solidarity. TikTok accounts share underground poetry and encrypted satire, podcasts hosted from exile decode daily speeches from Ortega and Murillo, and a digital magazine run entirely by anonymous contributors titled Sombra Libre, or Free Shadow, has reached over 2 million readers worldwide. Change, if it comes, will likely begin from outside. But even inside, there are cracks. Whispers of dissent now exist even among mid-level party officials. Disillusioned Sandinistas in their 60s who once fought Somoza now quietly admit they see his shadow in Ortega himself. History may not repeat, but it rhymes, and as the pressure mounts from within and without, this diarchy built on silence and fear may find itself challenged not by a single revolt, but by thousands of small awakenings. Throughout history, regimes that fuse family, faith, and force have often appeared indestructible until they weren't. The Shah of Iran once ruled with similar certainty, portraying himself as both divine protector and modernizer. His downfall came swiftly when the contradictions became too large to ignore. Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines too crafted a regime around constitutional dictatorship until the masses, exhausted by corruption and lies, brought it to its knees through people power. Nicaragua's diarchy may feel unprecedented in its legal symmetry, but its pattern is not new. Like so many regimes before it, it relies on one thing above all: the illusion of permanence. But history's most powerful lesson is that no regime is permanent. As citizens grow more connected, as truth finds its way into the cracks, as diaspora networks gain influence, repression loses its inevitability. It may take years, it may take generations, but it always comes undone. The real danger, however, is not just what's happening in Nicaragua, it's the global silence surrounding it. If the world looks away, if democratic nations fail to pressure, if media stops covering, if international courts stay idle, then the precedent will spread. A world that tolerates legal autocracy becomes one where democracy becomes performance art. We've seen it in Hungary, in Turkey, in Myanmar, in Russia. Now we see it in Nicaragua. Brazen, refined, and constitutional. This is why we must pay attention, because the story of Nicaragua is not isolated. It is a test, a mirror, a warning, and the next version might not come with billboards and sunbursts. It might look clean, it might sound democratic, it might pass every legal standard while subverting the spirit of democracy entirely. Thanks for watching. If this deep dive helped you see the deeper mechanics of global power, give it a like, it helps more than you know. And if you want more long-form geopolitical breakdowns on authoritarianism, resistance, and the evolution of power in the 21st century, subscribe now, hit the bell notification button, and join the community. Because in today's world, democracy doesn't just die in darkness, it dies in daylight, in legal clauses, in family portraits. But so does resistance. It's born in whispers, in stories, in people like you. See you in the next one, guys. Thanks for your time today.